Judge Mike Fields, thank you so much for joining us. You were a criminal court judge in Houston for many years, and now you want to become Attorney General. Why is that, and what are your priorities?
My first priority is making sure that we return common sense to Texas politics. In the last few years, it seems as though the farthest elements of both sides have taken over the debate. And I think most Texans are squarely in the center of the political spectrum. Uh, I'm hoping that we can retain or get back to some of that sanity.
And so let me ask you, this is a somewhat crowded field in the Democratic primary. You're one of five candidates, and I'm wondering what separates you from the other candidates in your mind, and why should Democrats in Texas select you as the nominee to go up against a Republican, perhaps the incumbent Ken Paxton?
So, Jack, if I can call you Jack as opposed to Mr. Fink,
Yes.
I, I'm doing something completely different in this election cycle. I'm not speaking ill of my opponents on the Democratic side. I think they're all worthy candidates. I don't know S. T-Bone Rayner. I've not seen him at any of these discussions, but in terms of Lee Merritt, Mayor Jaworski, Ms. Garza, these are all great candidates. And so I would encourage the voters to vote for any one of them, me included. I think that no matter who you vote for, you're going to come up with something better than what you have currently in the AG's office. I know that there's a crowded field on the Republican side as well, but there are some people who are equally as extreme as Mr. Paxton, if not more, and some who aren't. And so it's just going to be a wait and see game to see who they put forward. But on the Democratic side, I think you have a strong slate of candidates.
Without disparaging any of your fellow Democrats, is there something positive you would say about your own campaign with regards to why people should select you?
Sure. I've actually worked at the Attorney General's office. I've been an assistant attorney general. I've been an assistant district attorney. I've been a judge for many years. I've also been on the other side of the political spectrum. I was a Republican judge for 20 years and switched back to the Democratic Party after I left the bench. So I have a sense of both sides and what both sides are looking for in terms of good governance, or at least I hope I do. And so I'm hoping that that sense of compromise will work to make the office run better. There are a lot of great people who work for the Attorney General's office that nobody sees. They're in the child support division, they're administrative assistants, they just get the work done. And I think what they would like to do is return to the days when they could get the work done, feel proud of who they work for, and not have the office in the news every day for one ridiculous claim or another.
Are you expecting a runoff?
Yes. No matter,
And
I don't think that any one of us has the ability to uh, take this without a runoff of some sort. There are just too many people in the field.
And I was going to ask you, because some new polls came out over the weekend showing that most people in the Democratic Party don't know who they're going to vote for when it comes to Attorney General. And so how do you get your message out and your priorities out there?
Part of that is this. As you know, I'm not raising money. I think that money has corrupted politics, and that's not to say anything negative about those people who have raised money. It's just not something that I'm doing. I've self-financed as much as I financed. I'm wanting people to know that if I'm elected, this will be their office. When you look at dollars, you hold a dollar up to the light and you look at it, there are no strings attached to it. It's just paper. But when you look at campaign contributions, when you look at campaign money under the sharp light of day, there are always strings attached to it. And so I'd like to go into this election without any strings attached to my candidacy or my win if it occurs.
Let me ask you, because you mentioned the fact that you were a part of the Republican Party for many years. And so I guess my question to you is, when I've talked to grassroots Democrats, they want somebody who's been in the trenches fighting the fight for years. And so, what do you say to those who say, well, what do I want a former Republican for?
Well, if so, I think the two things are different. If you want somebody who's been in the trenches fighting the fight for years, I've been in the trenches fighting the fight for years. As a judge, labels really don't matter. How you do the job matters. If you'll take a look at my record, you'll see that I was asked to testify in front of the United States Senate Environment and Public Works Committee about how to do judging in a way that keeps people out of jail and prison. If you look at my record since I've left the bench, you'll see that I was one of very few who testified in favor of misdemeanor bail reform, where nonviolent misdemeanor defendants are kept out of jail as opposed to wasting taxpayer dollars housing them. Understand, there's always going to be things that happen, and people can do all kinds of crazy stuff while they're on bond, but the goal ultimately is to keep people out of jail. And so I think you'll see that I've done those things that Democrats would like to see done in terms of utilizing treatment, in terms of trying to keep people out of incarcerated situations, in terms of mentoring young people. I just had the label R beside my name.
So let's talk about some of the issues because, as you know, the state of Texas and the federal government, the Biden administration, have exchanged lawsuits over a variety of issues.
Mm.
And so one of those issues is the border. And I'm wondering, where are you on the state's efforts? They're spending $3 billion right now to secure the border and build their own wall. And so I'm wondering, where are you on this issue?
Well, I would say that the state is not spending $3 billion to build a border wall. I would say that taxpayers are still spending $3 billion to build a border wall. And we've already spent that money with the federal government. I think border walls are useless because when you go down to the border and you see what the wall looks like, it's not really a wall so much as a chain link fence. And it sends a wrong message. We need strong immigration laws, and I think we have them. They just have to be enforced. So, my position is let the federal government do the federal government's work and let the state government do the state government's work. Jack, when you look at what's happening at the border right now in terms of state enforcement, we've got National Guard troops down there who at times are not being paid, are away from their jobs, are ill equipped to do the job, and don't have the training. As opposed to taking, and I'm an Army veteran, so I'm this is an issue that's close to my heart. As opposed to taking those people away from their families and their jobs and their livelihoods, why don't we let immigration and customs enforcement do their job and manage the border situation? And if the people don't like how the federal government is managing it, then the people have the ability to vote the folks in the federal government out.
Do you think the federal government is handling the border situation well here in Texas?
I think that the federal government is handling the situation in a way consistent with what the people who voted for them want. Unfortunately, in Texas, they're not having an opportunity to do it because we have the state meddling in federal affairs. And we need to stop that. We need to let everybody stay in their own lane. And once again, that's what elections are for. If you don't like how things are going, you get to say your piece at the ballot box.
The Texas Heartbeat Act has been before the Supreme Court, US Supreme Court, twice, and it now may go before the Texas Supreme Court. It looks like that it will. And so I'm wondering, what is your thought specifically on the mechanism, the use of civil lawsuits to enforce this law?
I think it's wrong. And I think as Attorney General, you have an opportunity to say that it's wrong in an opinion to expand standing so that anybody can sue women who want to exercise reproductive choice. And understand, it offends me to have to be in a position as a man where I'm talking about a woman's reproductive choice options. That's really no place for me or you or any other man. That's an issue that women should address, quite frankly, and it should be a constitutional right that they get to address that in the way that they see fit. That we are allowing the government to meddle in that issue is beyond me. I can't think of any reproductive issue that the government runs for men. But for women, we feel very comfortable doing it. And so my question is, where does it stop? Where does it stop? Where do we stop telling women what they can do with their bodies?
Where are you as it relates to vaccine mandates and Governor Abbott's executive order to ban vaccine mandates? We're talking about COVID-19, of course, here in the state of Texas.
So my views on this, I think, are nuanced. I think that Governor Abbott's ban on vaccine mandates is incorrect in that it doesn't help stop the COVID outbreak. And I think that that's what the goal of emergency orders should be or is. Emergency orders for the governor should be used to protect people, to make a situation better. By halting vaccine mandates, it's actually made the situation worse. Understand, I'm vaccinated. My family's vaccinated. My children are vaccinated. I wear a mask. I don't know that the government should necessarily be ordering people to get vaccinated so much as strongly suggesting it. So while I think the governor's order against vaccine mandates goes against the spirit of the emergency powers that he's been given, I don't know that the government should be in the business of ordering citizens to get a vaccine if they don't want to get it.
And then I also wanted to ask you about the voting rights and the election integrity bill. As you know, the Biden administration has sued the state over Texas over this. And so I'm wondering, where do you fall?
With the Biden administration, and more specifically with pre-clearance. The Justice Department is trying to enforce the Voting Rights Act of 1964, which previously would have required that the Justice Department or a court in DC approve any changes to voting laws that might impact minority voters or previously disadvantaged voters, those descendants of African slaves. And so I agree with the Biden administration in pursuing the lawsuit under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which says that the state has to show a compelling interest for enacting voter changes that could disadvantage people of color, poor people who have a more difficult time getting to the polls. It makes sense to me.
And we've just discussed a number of issues. And I'm wondering, if you were elected Attorney General, how do you advocate for the state's laws that have already been passed if you disagree with them? In other words, in court, if you're fighting the Biden administration or whoever else is taking the state to court, how do you, as Attorney General, the state's top lawyer, argue for a law that you disagree with?
Well, I think you argue for the law that you agree with and not the law you disagree with. The citizens of the state of Texas require that the attorney general swear an oath to support and defend the laws of the United States, the Constitution of the United States, and of the state of Texas. Where those two don't mesh, you have to go with what you think is the appropriate law. I tend to think that on some instances, voting rights, that the federal law is the correct law. I tend to think on vaccine mandates that certainly law enforcement, military personnel, first responders, we need those services always available and up and running. It's one thing to ask that first responders and the military get a vaccine or require it. It's another thing altogether to require some person who works at HEB get a vaccine against their will. They're just two different things. And so I think you just have to have some nuance in your thinking, and you have to do what you believe is the correct thing according to the laws as they exist.
So just continuing, just to follow up on what you said. So would that necessarily mean that, let's say, voting rights or whatever the issue is, if you personally agree with the federal government's position, would you settle the lawsuit?
If I could, sure, sure. If I think that we're wrong and the Constitution is right, and I think the Constitution is right, then I would follow the Constitution.
Judge Mike Fields, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir, very much.